ask her for a chair? Your work has been critically located with reference to like video games and cloning and fantasy architecture, fantasy cartography, basically imagery or ideas from narrative sources that are like Gothic narrative or speculative narrative. And I'm wondering what your response has been to this kind of sort of critical referencing.
Well, there is. I think that it's really hard for me to talk about style, like let's say Gothic or. I actually I could feel the relation between video games and digital space. Not necessarily because I use computers, because my process is totally low tech. Actually, I use an etching press to process some techniques of printing and basically pretty traditional painting. But I think that those associations are part of the impact of your work. I mean, my work is not actually around for a long time, so you get a sense of the first thing that people threw on your work. It's like, okay, it's you know, all these disparate things. Mm-hmm. I mean, from that list of things that you name, I think the digital could be interesting, because I'm interested in the digital space, not in terms of printing technology. That is the typical, computer art that I pretty much despise. I'm interested in the situation of how we think. So we have artificial intelligence now, and it's pretty sophisticated. So in a way, how we think, how we make painting is totally different than how other people did painting. So as a thinking model, I think it's interesting. I'm not trying to make a painting that looks technological. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to actually just being natural, trying to actually do things with the painting that will be natural for somebody who's living in an environment like a technological environment.
I guess to the degree that abstract painting has been sort of, I guess in the last 20 or 30 years, sort of reassociated with the idea of narrative generally, like the sense of the referentiality we associate with painting that was previously considered sort of completely non-objective and pure and all that. I'm wondering if these subjects, this idea of speculative fiction, has to do with your intention as far as the subject matter of your work or the experience of the viewer with your work.
Well, I think my work reflects on that problem of more than of I'm interested in the idea of contamination and instead of purity in a way. I would think that contamination, as whatever that means, is a value that's more fair than purity. I mean, I'm pretty react with my work toward, I don't know, the minimal space, or I don't know, even to, I mean, I see my work as sort of a really fair attempt of revitalization of painting in a really broad sense. I mean, I think of my work actually, what you say is interesting about the fact that there are visual clues in the work. Okay, they are made. The whole work is made out of these visual clues, and sometimes I call them a paradox, a visual paradox. There are like some other artists use, I don't know, collage all over, composition, whatever. I use a sort of like a system of paradox. It's like a network. Mm-hmm. So it's a much more dematerialized, really open way to make a painting.
Could you sort of, imagine a painting and describe that more specifically? So I have a clear idea of what you mean.
Right. I mean, like for instance, I start by a sort of, by having a totally separate part. The painting start being a collage, and then I transfer this collage by means of printing. And there, I mean, there you have the end of the basically surface that you'll see in the end, and that is further painted. So I paint actually. I use this idea of painting through a collage, or like if I'm interested in the situation that the 60s collage was a really important spatial situation, like was minimal or Unitarian space for minimalism. I'm interested about this space where it will be a collage that heals itself. You will still have a feeling, the heterogeneity of a collage when you see the painting, but you will see a force of melting, a force of reintegration. Like if the painting is choosing its own composition instead of, you know, the balance and all that thing that's coming from.
Instead of composition.
Exactly.
So this in-painting is like a kind of suturing of the collage elements in a sense.
Exactly. And it has to do with digital space too, for a certain degree. And we are talking like a while ago, I guess, about this space of video games that you are in front, but at the same time you are through. And I think that it's interesting because we are not in. I mean, we are beyond the opaque space of minimalism. We are, you know, beyond of even, of course, composition, collage, even architectural space in the European sense.
This idea about, you know, the space that you're always in front of, and then this idea of this digital space where you're also going through, you know, like in a video game. I'm wondering, because I know, because I've read interviews that you've given where you reference the circuit paintings of Stella's, the ones that are named after sort of race car tracks, which have to do with this idea of, you know, speed and of time. And because I know in your paintings you have images in which sort of brushstrokes transform, or, you know, that your eye sort of follow, as a viewer, your eye follows the brushstroke and sees what happens in the space.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you think of this idea.
I think it's interesting, and I think one of the things, I mean, in the way that how I use a paradoxical network, let's say, instead of traditional composition or this sort of like a healing collage thing, is to actually achieve a much more dynamic space, a space that it will be not necessarily be grounded. The whole painting will like fry and like, you know, on like when you have a pan and, you know, you know what I mean? Like the whole thing will be sort of like right in front of your eyes, but sort of like a moving around. For my work, I prefer a sort of like a subterranean, a sort of like a subtle interior activity where you see, like you said, I mean, you see a brush mark that you can trust because it will become something else. They will sink into the ground, or the ground will create this sort of you know, absorption. And in my work, you cannot trust anymore about any visual, you know, pictorial element. I
guess I'm understanding this idea that you can that in a sense the imagery you're painting is sort of that at least one of the primary elements is this idea of gesture, even though the gesture is sort of is not at all sort of still attached to this idea of, you know, the direct emotive sort of performative act. But I'm wondering how this idea of movement in the paintings connects up with this idea of time that you talk about. Right.
I think that, you know, this is an interesting thing. Like in my work, you won't see an element at the, let's say, an isolated element. You will see like a net of activity. But it won't be like a Pollockian sort of net that is like, let's say, it's diverse but even in a way. It will somehow, you know, stay in front of you as a sort of like all over. My work, I think the space of my work is a differentiated net in a way, a space that is always differentiated.
The image of gesture is this kind of building block in the work, at least in some sense. Like the painting at some earlier point, is it because gesture in the history of painting has been associated with identity?
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's a good point. I think that, you know, I'm not part of the commodification of the brush mark or the expressivity, actually, because I'm interested in to reflect on expressivity, but not in my own way of putting a gesture into a painting as an expressive. Let's say I'm not a touch painter. I'm not interested in my touch, but I'm interested on the genetic problem of gesturality, or in the generic problem of ground. You know, these features in a way that I think when they interact in new ways, you can find a possible expression in a way. That is to say, it's not belong to my gesture, my personal touch, by how the painting displays itself, the space at the same time.
remind me of a change that I've noticed in your work. A few earlier shows that I'd seen up to this most recent one, there was a sense that that your activity had mostly to do with the printing, the carving of the stretcher bars, casting, brushstrokes, and what was still visible about the collage process. And the more recent show seems to be more pictorial, use fewer of those elements, the sort of extra pictorial elements, the stretchers that stick outside of the painting or the drag line, things like that.
The dragging.
Yeah, and the painting, the in-painting seems to have taken on a bigger role and also sort of waver between these styles that are like, it's not really photorealist style, and it's not really, it's sort of like this, it's like a conservator style, like a style which disguises itself completely.
European informalism.
Yeah, it's like some kind of complete, like a trompe-l'oeil style almost.
Well, I think that what is interesting to me is that we cannot get rid of style, and that's the illusion of a lot of people in the 90s, that they just can they go into this sort of like a literal sort of, there is reality. I mean, I think it's our relation with reality is a constant negotiation, and
you mean expressionist painting, or like?
Yeah, well, you know, there is a lot of you know, there's not a problem of media. It is a problem of how fast you think you can, if you are a realist or if you are a subjectivist or you're an abstract. I mean, what depending on what you believe. And I don't believe in any of those you know, categories. You know, I not even if I try. I mean, I cannot believe in that you can make sense of categories like, you know, realism, or I mean, you say hyperrealism, or like you know, abstraction, informal. I mean, it's at the same time, I don't believe that we can just quote from the past. Actually, I like to have a sort of like archaeological. I use this idea of dynamic archaeology in a way. So it's just, you know, in a way you have flash of style in a way from the work, but that is how you mistreat the idea of style in a way. Instead of appropriating and stabilizing style like many people did in the 80s, I try to mistreat style. So you have flat backs of this style, but you are in a contemporary situation.
The sense of these particular styles carry with them the meaning, the fact that the style is being used. For example, like an expressionist style means you would understand the painting to be readable in one certain sense, and so your natural response would be to say, oh, this is would be to have a connoisseurship response, like yes, it is an expressionist style.
Right.
And you're saying you're using style like means, not pure meaning, not pure sort of contextual meaning.
I think style is a much more problematic thing. It's like, let's say, maybe I would put an example that is always from you know, things that you transport it from life. Sometimes you can agencies it to art instead of just confusing, you know, things like, let's say, I used to do these paintings that, like, they have this, because this excess of material, these brush marks are kind of pushing toward the wall. So when they touch the wall, they create this sort of like a clumsy line. This type of painting came to being by my reflection of seeing somebody walking in the beach. There was this person who had a problem with his leg, and there was this gesture on the beach that was one punctual sort of the foot, and the other was like a dragging foot. So it was this asymmetric situation. So it was like this handicap experience in reality. I tried to transport it into an abstract sort of situation, but I think that the painting is as close as how a productive, functional painting could be. I'm trying to go around the idea of style in different ways. Like, I have this other image of, that is maybe a sort of like a science fiction image, that people are getting into the tattoo thing, and the piercing thing, and they're piercing over their body, and you get all this unpredictable piercing connection. You can get your ear connected to your mouth in a way. And I was thinking about an interior body tattoo, or a piercing inside your body. Like, people will run out of space, a superfluous space in their body, and they're going to start getting these tattoos inside their body. I mean, I think that brings the idea of style to a really strange situation too. Again, I mean, the reflection of style or the reflection of expressivity are often questions.
So it's like in terms of the sort of guts or corporeality of painting, if all the exterior space has been claimed or taken,
That's
you know,
nice.
stylistically, then somehow what's being presented to the viewer is like this internal
Yeah,
mark-making, this internal sort of
the overnight of style.
ah,
That is this interiorization of style, I think. I mean, what I'm saying is that we are living in a sort of like a new juvenile style now.
mhm.
That we have this toxicity of the beginning of the century, like you see in paintings like Art Nouveau paintings,
Like Art Nouveau
Art Nouveau paintings, or
Uh-huh.
juvenile style. We have this sort of like a more nasty, interior tattoo,
Mm.
mutant body.
Do
We are getting to serious science fiction.
did you mention Art Nouveau because it's a style that's a twist
Yeah.
in reference to like
Yeah. It's
the machine and the natural and
It's the 19th century, it's like this anti-century factory of the transfusion of styles.
mhm,
They were already dealing with dead style.
at the time.
Yeah, and you can see modernism as the advantage of saying let's get rid of this cultural illness
Mhm.
and let's do something pure. The new order in a way,
Uh-huh.
and so there
Can you
you
talk
go.
about the change between your older work and the newer sort of
Oh,
more
I'm
pictorial
sorry.
work?
Yeah. Actually,
In reference to that
thanks
idea?
that you bring back that. Yeah, well, I could say that my early work was more material oriented, so it was more still in a state of montage more than a collage, and I was interested in this actually shift of materialities and dematerializations and mutations and all this passage in a way. Like I always have a feeling that the collage, the tradition of collage, create an interesting way of being in front of different heterogeneous activities. My new work is more like fused in a way. It's less materialized and it's less predictable from my point of view. I amaze myself all the time in what's going on. You have a less of an agenda
Mhm.
than before. I'm going. The whole wave is like leaking all the time. It's just there's no. It's much more subjective.
My real question is, what is your sense of the sort of ideal experience that a viewer might have with your work in terms of where
It's the other way around.
where the
It's not
work is?
ideal at all. It's pretty lousy in a way. Like I try to make the point that, or I like to see my work or to be seen or to be used in a way. I like that word better, maybe to be used as a sort of like a dysfunctional tool in a way, where it will be working to the extent of not imposing, but suggesting different activities where you can decide for yourself if that is painting or that is another thing.
A lot of the word I hear about your work and reviews I've read about your work will reference it.
Did you read those?
Every single one.
Those are really nasty things.
I'm a magazine junkie. I can't stop. I'll mature someday. It will reference your work to, to the comic,
Right.
and sort of because of the limitations of reviews and critical writing, such as they are most of the time, the leap is made automatically that if there is some humor in the work, that the project must have something to do with satire. That there's a metaphoric component in the work which has to do with the ridiculous, with ridiculing and with satire. And I'm wondering, to the degree that in my experience with your work, I find humor in it. I locate it more in the sense of the ludicrous or the impossible, and more in the sense of farce, as opposed to sort of straight satire.
Yeah, and I like your interpretation of that, because again, it's first. I mean, I think that my work is right in the beginning of development, and people have they're right in the beginning of the writing too. I think it takes a really long time for people to assert on what you are doing. But I think that ironic, I never liked that word. I mean, ironic and serious and all that. I think that I always tend to dismiss the work as, if you can dismiss it in a linguistic sense. I mean, I like what you say actually, because I think that we cannot afford the luxury of having distance to ridiculize something. I mean, it means like, it's a pretty bourgeois sort of thing, like you have or like irony. I mean, you have this, you are in that mountain and you see all these things that you can ironize. You have this distance. I mean, I don't think there's distance in my work. It's just compact. I like what Barry Schwartzky says in a review, that he says that my work is a comedy of outrageous sincerity. Because I like the idea that many people think that if you are artificially oriented in your work, let's say, if you don't want to go straight to reality, especially in the 90s, that we mystify reality again, you will lose yourself into style and into all this, bad mannerist thing. And I think that's the other way around. You have to go through that in order to get to some place. I mean, I don't believe in that connection to reality. I try to be fair, actually, and I try to use I think sincerity is part of my work, and it is, and I could never get that idea through.
Because your work has, because the imagery is, is there and frozen, the brushstroke or the stripe or the grid, and because we associate all three of those sort of, I don't want to say images, those three sort of things, with art at various times, the brushstroke from sort of Impressionism to abstract expressionism, the grid in the 70s, the stripe in the sense of sort of Barnett Newman painting and building a surface rather than this sort of depth thing. I guess that it seems like all too often the assumption is that if we understand the past to be deterministic, even if people say like, well, I think formalism is somehow, is faulty and is inefficient and is wrong, that they still sort of believe that formalism existed in this deterministic sort of sense. I guess my question is, by using these bits of languages or these tropes or whatever, is there in some sense a critique of the associations with these sort of historical moments in your work?
No, I think that it's more related to passive citation or appropriation. I think I try to do something different, and I don't think it's really early on, because I think that certain other artists are trying to play on those areas too. But I think it has to do with the fact that you cannot. You are in front of the modernism, try to eliminate history, basically, try to create like a new sort of synchronic war, synchronic time, and there was all this backlash of postmodernism who just tried to grasp history, like sucking it in, I mean, like just making a Frankenstein. And I think that we are trying to deal with that space, and I think that maybe I could define what I'm trying to do by what I don't try to do. Like, I don't want to go. I don't believe in just literal space, and I don't believe I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, there's certain people who think about like the natural as a really straightforward process, like the myth of freshness, and there's a whole myth and culture about freshness. And I would think that the reflection about Japanese print, especially okusai, that the wave of okusai, I always thought that it's exactly the oriental reference of the brush mark of literature. And sometimes you can see them, and you have this wonderful relation. And the hokusai need an incredible artificial paraphernalia, like a lot of printing techniques to do that fresh image. And I think that presents this idea of what is artificial and what is natural.
I like the fact that you reference it with hokusai, because it seems to, because doing that rather than referencing some contemporary artist seems to put a lie to this idea that modernism is synchronous with sort of avant-gardism, that all modernism was about, eliminating history completely, and
no, the more analytical. I mean, we know that expressionism and things like that are considered modernist too. But our reading of modernism now has more to do with the analytical tradition, toward reductionism, toward the architectural, and toward installation.
In a way, it sounds like the other part of what we're talking about in the beginning, and that the degree to which this idea of the inside of the body tattoo and sort of morphing in video games, all of these modes that are sort of sci-fi, speculative fiction. One characteristic of those narrative modes is this idea of the days of future past, like standing in the present, talking about standing in the future when you're discussing the past.
Right,
it seems like
detemporalization.
Yeah, it seems like this has a lot to do with your work.
There is other disciplines that are really interesting into that. Like, for instance, architecture. I mean, there's really interesting lines of architecture that are really non-Teutonic sort of strategies. That are actually tactics that have to do more with the relation of event and time architecture. Like, for instance, Stan Allen and Greg Lynn. I mean, or like the philosopher Rashman from Columbia University. He has these new ideas of how to think about, painting in a different way. It's not, I mean, alternative to this sort of like a Frankfurt School sort of dead of art sort of thing. Maybe art is always dead. It's always alive. It's just there, just for you to do something with it, dead or alive.
That's a pretty good place to end.
It is.
Yeah.
So, good.
Sure enough?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Oh, very good. Very good.
I hope you understand.